Please join me in welcoming Nas to the stage.
Thanks, Whitney, for that introduction. As Whitney mentioned, I am a journalist and newsreader for the ABC and Triple J. In any given week, I get to read the news to an audience of 1.8 million people. It's a job that's sometimes stressful, but it's for the most part really fun, fast-paced, and I absolutely love it. It's a bit of a difficult job to do when you're totally blind, though. I lost my sight, as Whitney mentioned, when I was 6 months old. Blood vessels burst in the back of my eyes, tearing my retinas away. I was rushed to hospital and spent much time over the first 2 years of my life in and out of hospital, having experimental procedures with doctors trying to figure out exactly what had happened to me. In the end, they really couldn't explain why or what had happened, simply putting it down to a rare retinal abnormality. I started school at the age of 4.5. Initially, I was enrolled at a school for intellectually disabled students. But it wasn't long after starting there that the teachers were recommending to my parents that I should be transferred into mainstream education. They did, and the first few years of my schooling life were really difficult. I was learning Braille, and I was an immensely fast, creative, imaginative Braille writer, but when it came to reading, I really struggled. I'd go home most nights and my parents would force me to sit down and practice reading, and I'd always end up in tears or we'd end up in an argument. And this went on for several years until I was taken to a neurologist and I was diagnosed with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, or CMT. It's a condition that affects a person's balance, muscle toning, and sensitivity in the hands, arms, legs, and feet. So to put it simply, I don't have enough sensitivity in my fingertips to feel the Braille dots on a page. It was an incredibly tough diagnosis. I mean, traditionally, people who have no vision learn through Braille. That was the only way. But it was a really important turning point for me. Initially, I didn't know how I was going to learn. I hated school already, and this was going to be even more difficult. But my teachers introduced me to the use of a laptop and taught me to touch type. They also introduced me to my very best friend, JAWS. It's a screen reading software that is loaded onto the computer. It's a little Americanized voice that scans everything on the screen and reads everything out aloud. So as I type, it repeats what I've typed. This technology was so important. It enabled me to go from someone who really struggled at school and didn't know what I was going to do with my life or where things were going to go, to someone who ended up finishing Year 12 with a university entry score of 95.75 and the top of my grade. I started university in 2007. I did a journalism degree at the University of Technology, Sydney. University was an incredibly exciting but really challenging time in my life. I was learning how to get on public transport on my own, also managing the full-time study and doing unpaid internships. I knew that the piece of paper wasn't going to be that one thing that got me a job at the end of my degree. I needed to set myself apart from my peers. That meant work experience. And I ended up graduating 3.5 years later with a really long CV and a really big portfolio of published work. I had done work at every single newspaper, radio station, and women's magazine you could think of across Sydney. I knew that it was going to be tough to look for a job, but I thought it was going to be tough because it was competitive, and there were so many people with a communications degree looking for a job in media. That wasn't the problem, though. I didn't realise how bad a problem discrimination was in the workplace. People used to tell me about it, even as a youngster. When I was 15, that's when I decided I wanted to do journalism. And people used to tell me, oh, you have to be really careful with what you choose. You know, certain industries really look favourably on certain people with disabilities. And I thought, no, that's not true. When I started looking for employment, I would never ever write in my application that I had a disability. I found it really important to just be judged solely on merit. I didn't want them to know anything until the interview. Some disabilities you have to disclose, or you don't have to disclose, but some are visible, like mine. And when I'd turn up to interviews, I would get these really shocked-sounding people. They didn't know quite how to act, what questions to ask. They didn't really feel comfortable. And usually I got a really negative response. They would say things like, "I'm sorry, we just don't think you meet the criteria of the job description." And some would be more overt, and they'd say things like, "We just don't have a safe enough workplace for someone like you." And one even said to me, "How the hell can you be a journalist? You're totally blind. It's just not going to work. Forget about it." I'm glad I persisted, because in 2011, I beat a cohort of 700 to 800 people, and I was given one of 10 cadetships at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I spent a year in the Sydney newsroom learning how to be a radio and online journalist. I covered everything from courts, crime, sport, and politics. It worked because the ABC took a chance. It worked because they were able to purchase JAWS, the screen reading software, and load it onto a computer at work for me, so that I could work in exactly the same way as any other journalist. They also took the time to have open and honest discussions with me about my needs in the workplace. They wanted to know what they had to do to make sure I could do my job to the best of my abilities. They also took the time to talk to my colleagues, to let them know that if they had any concerns, they needed to come and talk to me. They needed to feel comfortable to ask me questions. And it made the world of difference. I then took a job in the ABC's regional office in Bega, 6 hours south of Sydney. In 2012, I spent a year working there, learning how to read live news bulletins and learn how to run a regional newsroom day to day, even coming up with the news agenda each and every single day. But I didn't go alone. The ABC sent a technical operator with me, and it was his responsibility to make sure that I knew how everything worked, from technology to getting around. And it meant that I was able to work confidently and as independently as possible. He was also responsible for developing the impressive system I use, because I think it's pretty impressive, the impressive system I use to read the news. I took the job at Triple J in 2013 and moved back to Sydney, and I haven't looked back since. I'm sure you're asking now, well, how do you read the news if you don't read Braille? To me, it's pretty simple. I'm sure it won't sound like it once I play you a sample. Basically, JAWS has come to the workplace with me. I have it on a laptop in my studio, and I have headphones on. JAWS scans the screen where I have put all the stories, and it reads them through my headphones, and I listen and I repeat what I hear. And this process of listening and reading at the same time is something that I've been developing over 4 years. And while it's not perfect, for the most part, it works. It's not the only thing I can hear in my headphones, though. I also hear myself through the microphone. I can hear the audio grabs that I need to play during the bulletin. And I can hear a clock telling me when to start and when to finish the bulletin. Our bulletins are 3 minutes. Absolutely no more and no less. And I do have a really quick sample of what I'm hearing in my headphones when I'm reading the news to you, just to play for you now. So if Dave, Maestro, could hit the button.
Criticism over negotiating tactics and US police to wear body cameras. Nas Campanella with Triple J News. The Palmer United Party Senate leader Glenn Lazarus has taken issue with the government's negotiating tactics for its higher education overhaul. Senator Lazarus says he's been inundated with text messages from the Education Minister Christopher Pyne, even though he's never passed on his mobile number. The Palmer United Party insists it will vote against the government's deregulation plan for universities. Without the party's support, the government's plan can't pass the Senate.
There's been a lot of discussion today about changes we want made, improvements we want made by 2030. I have several from my particular perspective. I would really like to see more organisations across all sectors of work to do more, to make more of an effort to attract and retain employees with disabilities. I would also like to see more employers implementing awareness programs for people with disabilities. It was so important for not only myself to be able to express what I needed to do my job properly, but what my colleagues needed from me, and for us to be able to communicate with each other effectively, and to ensure that my needs were being met, as well as the organisation's needs being met. I would also love, and this one is incredibly ambitious, but I would also love for the number of people with disabilities who are unemployed, I would love for that number to halve. And most of all, I would love to put an end to discrimination in the workplace, whether you are someone with a different religious background or a disability. It needs to stop. People like me find that sort of unbelievable treatment stressful, frustrating, and it's unacceptable. And that is the one thing I would love to change by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Naz. Thank you. Thank you for such a fantastic speech. And if anyone has a question for Naz, please find your way down to a microphone. But I do want to ask you first, Naz. You know, you're a very strong, driven person. Having worked with you, I know that, and also listening to your speech. But what were the moments that made you, were there moments that you ever thought, oh, this is too hard? Or what were the moments, was there a moment that you felt, you know what, I'm going to do this, just watch me?
I think it was the moment where that particular panellist on an interview panel where I went for a particular job, and that person did say to me, you do realise this is never going to work. You're totally blind. How the hell are you going to become a journalist? And I walked out of there and I burst into tears and thought, this was a ridiculous choice of career. I don't know why I've spent all this time and energy, and it's all for nothing. And I went home and was a bit upset for a while and then got over it, because that's exactly what that person wanted. They didn't want it to work and they didn't want to consider it. And that's what made me think, no, this is going to work. I just have to keep trying. And it worked.
And we're glad it did. Does anyone have a question? No? Look, Naz, thank you so much for coming in. It was a great speech and really inspiring. And it was lovely to see you again too.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.